Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation, where we focus on the most important um, development of the 21st century, the cybernetic communist action, an incipient action to be sure, but one that realizes that advanced computing, so-called AI, has the potential to be and will soon be the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. Not the bourgeois AI of the U.S. and Western-dominated for-profit concerns and military industrial organs that you are familiar with, but things more like the open source large language model workforce multiplier that I describe on this show. This workforce multiplier has pretty uh, simple qualities that other revolutionary weapons in history did not have. As powerful as what you would traditionally think of as weapons, or as powerful as things like the mass media have been in various contexts, they did not have this quality that AI agents possess, which is creating a thing which is able to mimic a human being in all important particulars, being able to spearhead projects, and so forth. And also, human beings present who do have those qualities cannot be endlessly replicated, or nearly endlessly replicated, as an open source large language model can be. These are important developments, and bourgeois technologists recognize these important developments, but of course, almost all of the conversations of bourgeois technologists and technophiles, almost all the conversations of this kind, contextualize this in something like Mark Fisher's capitalist realist context, where these things are used by those military industrial contractor war criminals or for-profit concerns who are killing the planet almost exclusively to ends which do not improve the material conditions of the masses. And so conversations about whether such a thing is an X risk, they're really conversations that are pretty particularly avoiding discussing the real problems, which are financial capital and empire. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. I hope to play some small role in bringing about this change, wherein something like a people's superintelligence and people's AI takeoff, things which would improve those material conditions and create a livable world besides, will supplant, overwhelm, by whatever means necessary, these forces of this bourgeois so-called superintelligence, which is no superintelligence at all. It is superpowered super stupidity, hastening the death of our species, hastening inequality and instability of various kinds. And I'm going to talk about a person who I had some exchange with, and a person whose material I've shared for a long time. His name is Professor Anthony Zenkus. And unless you have a misimpression of what I would say about Professor Zenkus, um, um, I would. So I've had recent exchanges with a person from the American Communist Party, crypto-fascist, MAGA communists, people who are by their every word and deed um, uh, confusing issues around the anti-war efforts which they're supposedly focused on, confusing issues around the necessity for the abolition of private wealth by saying things like small businesses are communist. That's not what the abolition of private wealth is, and so on and so forth. Just an unholy host of CIA talking points insinuated into every conversation. So I had a person who was active in this organization, so-called organization, reaching out to me recently. I didn't really realize what they were up to as far as the ACP was concerned, and So this person is a crypto-fascist uh, by identifying as a communist, but playing a game that's not um, consistent with revolutionary goals. They would be a person who's making a mistake on the order of magnitude of those participating in what Joseph Stalin correctly called um, the objectively the left wing of fascism, that of social democrats, anti-communist so-called socialists, people who are also not um, fighting for the abolition of private wealth, and so their efforts, like those of Bernie Sanders, if they are in good faith at all, which Bernie Sanders is not, are easily undermined by the forces of the ruling elites. So you would put these confused and often very duplicitous crypto-fascists in the same category as people who are on the wrong side of history. Professor Zenkus is not on the wrong side of history. He's a serious Marxist-Leninist, and so I'd put him more in the category of someone who I talk about in glowing terms or wistful terms quite often on these cybernetic communist conversations. Salvador Allende, a pacifistic Marxist-Leninist, a person who is setting themselves up to meet the same fate as Salvador Allende if they were to come into power on the basis of their um, reformist, generally reformist and unwaveringly pacifistic communism. So in the 1970s, it was not quite so clear that we were sitting on top of a ticking time bomb of the capitalistic climate apocalypse. Having Marxist-Leninists who were not militant become the ruling party, as happened in Allende's Chile, and actual reforms of a variety of kinds were underway in those years before the technological planned economy of 1971 to 1973 was being rolled out. The most significant event there, but you can read about there's a much larger body of work about what the transformation of Allende's Chile generally, because of this Marxist-Leninist ruling party. The thing to say about building a humane and sustainable economic system is one must do whatever's clever, right? The Allende government was destroyed by U.S. fascism through the actions of a puppet, Pinochet, a literal fascist. And the U.S. is literal fascist in almost every respect. And but when we're looking at this ticking clock of the U.S. run and enforced omnicide, um, which will become inescapable. We will reach runaway overheating around 2029 if we do not dramatically transform the industrial bases, most particularly abolishing the ringleader of all of this, the United States military-industrial complex, $1 trillion a year superpolluting abomination, unlike a force unlike any other in the history of humankind, a force for evil, and also almost wholly removing the fossil fuel sectors, short of actions which would cause a supply chain collapse and the death of millions, almost wholly removing livestock systems and operating on a similar principle. Um, this these are just things that must be done. It's not really negotiable. So Professor Zenkus, by being someone saying I want to do those things, but not supporting any militant action, is taking the side of the bourgeois effectively. Um, um, the bourgeois insist that you handle things through established channels because they know that those established channels are designed to fail insofar as these things are concerned, which is to say, insofar as everything of substance is concerned. Um, the United States government is just an elaborate farce. The federal government. And this so this pacifism is no pacifism at all, right? A pacifist who is responsible for the omnicide in some indirect fashion is a violent person. A person who stops the omnicide is a less violent person. That shouldn't be too difficult to figure out. But you'll find many people who generally are on the right side of things as it relates to scientific socialism or scientific communism, who will stipulate this in advance that um, uh, uh, militant revolutionary action and insurrection are simply not suitable, as if there's some other alternative, which there's no other alternative. This is a person who's effectively just tailing the Democrats. Um, but not a person who is just a deranged person like those people of the American Communist Party. Not a person like Bernie Sanders, who is objectively the right wing of fascism. You say, well, I don't think Bernie Sanders is a fascist. Well, Bernie Sanders has always voted for $1 trillion a year super polluting military budgets. So he's a supporter of military fascism in the United States. He kind of wants a public health service, but his efforts have not produced a public health service, and in fact have worked to sabotage such things. Um, and um, so, well, anyway, I am going to change gears now and talk about the emergence of AI agents and its importance to uh, our times. Um, and it's important, I guess, to describe some concepts to do with cybernetic communism there. But it's also important to describe the features of AI agents and what they're going to develop now, what they have, the capacities that they have now, the applications that they would have now to the Vanguard, a network for people's superintelligence, an open source large language model work group that would operate as a workforce multiplier, allowing you to do dramatically more with less. So, in this insurrectionist context, we would say that studies have demonstrated that when people become properly organized, mobilized, educated in those revolutionary frameworks, about 3% of them are only necessary to bring about a revolutionary change in a society, most particularly, of course, the building of a humane and sustainable economic system, which must be built and which must remove private wealth, must be necessarily a planned economy in these 21st century contexts, must necessarily be an advanced technological planned economy. Um, this so these AI agents have a few features, and this is significant to discuss because these are different from the AI agents that you are more familiar with. Um, they are the AI agents that you are more familiar with are automatic writers producing academic essays in great number for you, but not having a lot of insight into their action or very little insight into their behavior, not having the ability to plan, not have the ability to be a real partner to you, and and so this transition from academic writing assistants to AI agents is a significant one, and the fact that these exist in the form of open source large language models is a minor miracle when you consider that the imperialist United States and the far right neoliberal United States would have preferred that nothing be open source, everything be in the vein of this far right neoliberal for profit model. But the United States, despite its ability to destroy countries when they are rolling out a technological planned economy that would have spread across South America and inspired the rest of the world to um, build different social forms and economic forms that would have left us in a position where we are not, where we would not be looking at the capitalist climate apocalypse being inescapable in a few short years, had the United States military industrial complex not done these many criminal acts, not just in Chile, of course, but as is written about in the book Endless Holocaust, the United States is responsible for 300 million murders in wars of theft and anti-communist wars and other genocidal actions in its existence, um, and many, many, many millions of those, of course, occurring in contexts including Chile, where a million people died, very much like this. And this uh, the classes of agents that we can discuss and their application to the Vanguard network are of interest here, and a distinction between a major distinction between agents is whether they remember what they're doing um, and learn from past experiences. So we could have agents that are capable of working as a partner with you in the way that I described that don't retain a lot of memory of what's already occurred. These would be called reactive agents, and these are not so difficult to find if you're looking for if you're when you're looking at the slate of the cutting edge of open source large language models today. Um, just another distinction would be the work that the AI agents are doing. So there would be with inside of the um, Vanguard network for People's Superintelligence task specialized agents. In fact, I've described the work for building the Vanguard network for People's Superintelligence as being relatively limited rather than the work for scaling the project involving lots of people and getting it on lots of machines. And that is because open source large language models with agentic qualities sufficient to become workforce multipliers already exist, so they would merely need to be specially tailored, modified relatively slightly, so that they're better able to work with one another in this and be steered by human beings, which requires the building of some kind of prompt mechanism, which again is already built, but would merely need to be integrated into this model as described. Um, and this is um, significant to this because with task specialized agents, there might be many different open source large language models, which will tend to vary as to the degree to which they are truly open source. One of the um, examples of this would be Llama 3.2, which is open source in a loose sense, developed by the Meta organization, Facebook. A very bad organization for things like this generally, but nevertheless could be useful in this context. So when you're looking at task specialized agents, a good deal of work might be done in different contexts by something like Llama 3.2, and other kinds of work might be done by other AI agents. Um, and this would require, again, a lot of development to build the Vanguard network for people's superintelligence. It shouldn't be understated, the work that would need to be done. But the bigger impediment really is basically getting to 10,000 users, people who are prepared to buy One model of this, download this modified open source large language model and prompt mechanism to their machine, and leave their machines on, or have it running on the network when their machines are on, and also be answering a few, as likely as not, yes or no, or very brief emails throughout the course of a week to help to steer the agentic mass so that it does not hallucinate or go off the rails or engage in work that is not helpful. Um, and there are AI agents that possess abilities to better handle complex problems and concepts and ambiguity. These are referred to as context-aware agents. These have improved quite a lot. If you have been using open source large language models or large language models generally in the last few years, you'll notice that they get less confused with ambiguous sentence structures in your prompts than they used to. And this is a significant development. The ability to interact more easily and more usefully with the humans steering the AI agentic mass is an important development. The degree to which these AI agents are generally intelligent or need to be generally intelligent to become the basis for building a people's superintelligence is probably not a settled question in anyone's mind. But I would contend that by the standards of products at the level of Llama 3.2, we have things that are not generally intelligent in the most commonly available open source kinds, but nevertheless, the sum being greater, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts in a certain sense, these things can come together and interoperate to form something that would be an incipient superintelligence, and would most importantly be in a position when it grows beyond 10,000 users and that minimum viability to put pressure on these offending sectors. And so when you have hundreds of thousands or millions of users operating in this way, you have a thing which rivals the force of nation states or large corporations and operating for good rather than evil, as those bourgeois nation states and corporations do. And it would be a thing which could effectively, with millions of users, I believe, stop but not reverse the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse, which again is not going to be done by bioremediation or carbon capture, things of this kind, or some technology which will take many years to become a commonplace. It must be done by stopping the actual offending sectors. And so techno-optimists like the people that I've been critical of in the techno-Gaian community, these are people who are selling you a bill of goods. They are focusing on things which are not coming down the pipeline in a timely enough fashion to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. And they pretty systematically avoid concerns, the most pressing of concerns to do with the environment, like the super polluting abomination of the military industrial complex, like the fact that US bombs and Israeli bombs may have accounted for 5 to 10% of the total contribution to the capitalist climate apocalypse, the specific exploding of bombs in 2024. That is ignored. And this is true generally of technophiles like this, techno-optimists, transhumanists, and so forth, that they are extremely, extremely intellectually dishonest people and morally cowardly people. And so they focus on things which are consistent with a kind of neoliberal goals, but and thus doing things which have no real purpose at all, that are not actually helping to better humankind or build a livable world. There are Furthermore, there are agents which are not just able to parse some ambiguity, but are able to understand human beings in a more thoroughgoing way. They have something like a theory of mind. And now we're getting into AI agents which might not become as available to the masses in the course of 2025, but which are nevertheless being developed and which could be pretty quickly incorporated into something like the Vanguard network at such time that they do become available. Um, but these are things that are increasingly being used in other contexts to um, help people a little more easily in contexts of things like customer service calls. Um, and um, This is a field of interest to the uh, Vanguard network, to be sure, but the focus will tend to be more on the work of the user comrade prompt engineer steering by typing, the agentic mass who need not have such um, a clear human-like qualities to do their work. Um, and you, when you have overcome hurdles of this kind, however, the ability to understand human activity and needs, the ability to reflect on your actions and plan on that basis, um, some more comprehensive feedback mechanisms there. You are having something that are generally intelligent AI agents. And there have been studies just in recent weeks that suggest that the cutting edge of this subfield of machine learning large language models have advanced to the point where they are able to outperform the highest level of professionals across a number of metrics, suggesting that we have entered this era of general intelligence. This is of significance to the people's superintelligence, but consider that outside of some massified context, outside of some collective action to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse or bring about material changes for the masses, that such developments are of real limited significance. The significance more of the mechanical Turk of centuries past, able to dazzle people, not changing things none too much, however. Um, that at a certain point, single AI agents might reach super intelligent levels, and it's difficult to speculate there. It's also not entirely clear what the boundary between general intelligence and superintelligence would be. As I've said, for example, the Vanguard network could use things that are not generally intelligent to build an operation that involves human beings and AI agents that would be in total super intelligent. But super intelligent agents themselves will be able to be doing much faster work for cures for diseases, solving problems, and but you should not assume that these for-profit sectors having access to such power will lead to better conditions for yourself. High automation has been a feature of bourgeois nation states for many, many, many decades. Farming sectors have been quite nearly fully automated for quite some time, but in this context of the United States, where so much of this did come to pass, again, that is because violence, right? Um, uh, the technological planned economy of Chile spreading to other countries in the region, being allowed to exist, not being sabotaged by imperialists, that would have been a springboard to another path to a people's superintelligence, but nevertheless, a people's superintelligence and AI takeoff effects, which I believe would have occurred specifically without the interference of the U.S. military-industrial complex by around 2010. I think without the influence of the larger imperialist West, and not focusing only on the U.S., that would have occurred at an even earlier time, maybe in the 20th century. Um, and so it is important to recognize that this full automation of farming sectors, for example, or near full automation of farming sectors in the U.S. Represents a theft from the people who did most of the labor in these sectors prior to that time. ADOS, Africans descended of slaves, people actually living in that condition in the 20th century sharecroppers. Um, if this model, if capitalism were capable of using full automation to benefit the people most concerned, those new Africans would now be full and equal stakeholders in those for-profit farming concerns. They're not. In fact, they've been systematically excluded from this. These are now things that are held by the European descended ruling elites, and furthermore, um, the new Africans have been excoriated and punished, and I've been given the booby prize of having something like a social safety net to sustain them so that they can find other work or continue to live without the means of subsistence that they had in those earlier times, or in the by the 20th century standard. This th- this should make clear to you that a capitalistic automation is not something which raises all boats, as people like transhumanists and technophiles generally will contend. By and large, this kind of philosophy, the TESCREAL philosophy, as it's been called, which includes transhumanists, effective accelerationists, and others, all of this range of capitalistic technophiles. Um, this is kind of thinking is basically just 20th century trickle down economics, the lies of bourgeois economics, with some science fiction bullshit thrown in to make it seem more palatable or more dazzling than it actually is. Um, and It should also be clear in your mind that these forces of elitism and financial capital do not have the ability to even a mechanism to do a thing like um, uh, uh, the bettering of human beings, the transfer of resources from rich to poor when some level of automation is reached. That's true whether you're talking about 20th century high automation or whether you're talking about the high automation of advanced algorithms that could produce human-like actors. Um, so the focus has to necessarily be on things outside of these for-profit operations, namely, in this context, the open source large language model. There are many sectors there are many subfields of computer science that are of interest beside machine learning, but none of them have this thing, something comparable to an open source AI agent that is available to ordinary people. And um, so it's best to focus on this field for now, in my opinion. Um, this, well, I'll talk about a few other concepts to do with this open source large language model, the Vanguard Network for People's Superintelligence, which I hope to begin work on in earnest. By and large, my work in this area is more as a tech evangelist. Because I have worked on startups and because I have the assistance of open source large language models themselves in helping me to craft these ideas, I'm able to talk about these things in programming terms in some of these presentations, but I do not have the high level of skill that um, um, uh, would be necessary to work full time on this in the way that I would like. I do not have the deep understanding of the Python language, for example, that I would like, and or other machine learning necessaries. And so I have focused on presentations of this kind and artwork, which I share in many conversations, to do with this in the hopes that I will either um, uh, be able to assemble a team of people willing to work in these ways, and also a single individual with those skills that I described would not be enough to build this. It must necessarily be scaled and worked on by many. Or, as I've said before, any a relatively small a place which has a few GPU machines could build this thing, which would be the seed for people's superintelligence. And that can happen almost anywhere on Earth at almost any time. And so I spread these, share these infographics and artwork and these words across social media in the hopes of sparking that fire as well, even if it does not directly involve my efforts as something like a project manager. Um, and this um, um, a few ideas to do with reclaiming AI for the people. This necessarily requires a focus on decommodification and on something like a commons, an algorithmic commons is an important component for people's superintelligence. This thing, superintelligence will not be built by for-profit concerns. They will build that thing that I described as superpowered super stupidity. So it requires actual human beings, not bourgeois clowns, and and it requires them in great number, and it requires things like open source repositories of AI models, data, knowledge, and the ability to work in these contexts. And by doing this, we can democratize access to this most powerful revolutionary weapon in history and prevent its further monopolization by private corporations and omnicidal bourgeois states um, uh, who have quite demonstrably made the problems of inequality and instability worse by their techno-fascism in recent decades. This concept of an algorithmic commons is most crucial, and there is no understating the importance of uh, decommodification and collective ownership and action in these areas. Of course, these are all things that are conveniently ignored by almost every bourgeois technologist and technophile. The concept of human beings actually being helped by any of this is almost wholly ignored in practice by these people. They will hand wave the whole subject by assuming, in the vein of what I said of this trickle down economics logic with some science fiction mumbo jumbo thrown in, um, um, uh, they will hand wave the problems of capital and empire. Um, these people are almost worthless. Almost even people who have extraordinary skill for doing things like building something that could be super intelligent, their efforts are counterproductive when they are operating in those techno-fascistic and far-right neoliberal and bourgeois and militaristic frameworks, which is everybody, basically everybody, almost everybody that you've ever heard of. Um, and of course, there are people doing good work in open source, even in this place as bad as the United States. Um, Concepts that also must be touched upon to have a good understanding of cybernetic communism's role in our 21st century would be, in a word, something like post scarcity, which it's um, unmeaningful to listen to these bourgeois technologists and technophiles talk about post scarcity because their efforts have produced opposite effects thus far, as I discussed in the context of new African sharecroppers losing their livelihood and having not even um, any minimal replacement that would allow them to say continue to live indoors. Um, um, but automation under the Vanguard Network for People's Superintelligence or similar massified AI would lead to a change in the necessaries of labor, but not mass unemployment in the negative context that is generally described under capitalism. Capitalists have no desire to fix any of the problems that have led to such instability and economic inequality thus far. And so, by and large, when they're talking about the jobless apocalypse, they're basically sneering at you and taking credit for having caused this problem and continuing to cause this problem and giving you no recourse to even have your basic needs met. This is not a problem specifically of the 21st century. We've already faced a jobless apocalypse under far-right neoliberal capitalism. That's quite intentional. Read the Powell Memorandum. You will see that this is all designed to keep people from asserting their basic human rights. That is to say, this precarious situation of having to work more hours in the course of a month than your hunter-gatherer ancestors would have worked to keep a roof over your head. That is a scam designed to keep you from being able to build things like technological planned economies or build things like anything at all that would tend to rectify inequality. Um, the concepts, another important concept for cybernetic communists might be um, collective intelligence, which is pretty well implied by words like people's superintelligence. But I'll give you a little context of my thinking there. I came to thinking about this after many decades of wanting to be or imagining myself or engaging with the philosophy of hive mind collectivism. I have been interested in this for as long as I can remember, practically. And but the hive mind collectivist is not a form, not a social form that exists at present, although it could in short order, with the use of things like brain-computer interfaces, which would create a technologically mediated telepathy between groups of people and even mass groups of people. This could derive from things like graphene non-invasive graphene skull cap brain-computer interfaces or microsurgical interfaces, like you might be more familiar with from the Neuralace models. And but people react quite strongly to the prospect of a hive mind collective, and perhaps not without good reason. It's a substantial departure from the experience of human beings at present. My thinking in starting the work on the Vanguard network for the People's Superintelligence was to build a proxy hive mind, a thing which could provide some of the benefits of the true hive mind collective, but without changing people's experiences in such shocking ways. And um, uh, the people's superintelligence could be built through the use of these AI proxies in a workforce multiplying way that I described, without really people changing their lifestyle or experience very much, except perhaps um, people, those people, and people generally being required to work less. Um, and that's an important development of the Vanguard network for people's superintelligence is when it reaches millions of users. It is a thing which could stop the capitalistic climate apocalypse. When it reaches maybe tens of millions of users, it is a thing which is in position to do things like um, provision across many lands in all of the world, even the universal basic services, which are so sorely lacking, should be the first focus of any serious technologist, would be seeing that a billion or more people do not live in this direst of conditions as they do today. Approximately a billion people on this planet who live their entire lives without sufficient potable water or food or other necessaries of life like shelter, and as a result, their lives are cut short just a few short years later. And this outcome is, again, the direct result of the actions of these mass murderers like the United States military industrial complex, killing 300 million people, so many of them in contexts of people who are beginning to build humane and sustainable economic systems in their own country. This is the same problem, the problem of U.S. imperial fascism and the problem of persons living in utter penury. Um, the provisioning of universal basic services is a necessary job of the Vanguard network for people's superintelligence. But when you're rounding the corner to maybe hundreds of millions of users, you have a thing that can be fully, perhaps, provisioning those services in ways that bourgeois nation states simply do not want to do. They don't fail to do them; they simply do not want to do them. Um, but you can have a higher standard of a single payer public health service, for example, one that, by virtue of being AI powered, is able to not merely treat diseases as we understand them today, but treating more and more diseases, including reversing the effects of aging and decrepitude, stopping those, reaching a point known as longevity escape velocity, a point which some radical life extensionists who are well heeled think that they have already reached. You can hear people like Peter Thiel or Ray Kurzweil, bad people, speculating that they may have reached this point. But by building a single payer a public health service that is AI powered and that has a mandate to treat aging as a disease, we can see better effects than those people might be anticipating, not just for people who are well heeled, but for everyone. And I think of a person like Andrew Carnegie, a person as rich as Croesus in the early 20th century who did not survive so far into the 20th century, but who was very, very powerful in those years. And he had a lower standard of medical care than just a Soviet peasant of a few years later, let's say by the mid 1930s, when the Soviet Union was in the process of doubling its life expectancy in just a quarter of a century, as it did, by building things like single payer public health services. Um, and so think of these billionaire radical life extensionists, as people whose interests would be better served by these massified contexts and these operations outside of the for-profit concerns um, that by which they exploit others. Their interests would actually be better served by something like a Vanguard network for people's superintelligence, which would be capable of building this um, open source, or rather AI powered single payer public health service that leads to not just longevity, escape velocity for a very limited few, um, an insignificant development, but universal super longevity, everyone on Earth living as long as they would like. Even that, I think, is a modest goal of something like the people's superintelligence, because when it reaches hundreds of millions or billions of users, I would say basically the sky is the limit. We could quite quickly, once the problems of inequality and human immiseration are solved, which must necessarily be solved through the redistribution of resources and the ending of private wealth, we can see things like the human race becoming a spacefaring species, things like pushing up on the Kardashev scale, becoming a different kind of advanced technological civilization entirely. Um, but these technological singularitarian kinds of effects should not be anticipated, except that we do things like build the people's superintelligence. The people who generally use words like technological singularity are people who are actively building or cheerleading for this superpowered super stupidity of bourgeois AI of the U.S. and West, things which are only making the problems of precariousness, like the ecocidal effects, the runaway overheating effects, and the economic instability, which is of real concern and parallel concern. The city of Los Angeles, much of it was burned in recent hours and days. Um, and people who were formerly perhaps not so vocal in that city on the need for the abolition of private wealth may very well become something quite like an insurgency. So these bourgeois criminals and war criminals are correctly afraid and should be afraid of the chickens coming home to roost, so to speak, for the many crimes that they've committed. Um, the, the well, I'm going to end this conversation now. I have another appointment, but I would like you again to think of this possibility of the people's superintelligence becoming this global multi-billion person network, able to do things well beyond even mitigating the effects of climate change or poverty or disease. And I leave you with these words that I like to repeat. Uh, the artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my dearest comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.